because currently we have a separate UI team, so I'm not that much involved in UI works. But yeah, backend.
Okay, so you used to develop the web services as well, right? REST
Yeah,
APIs.
RESTful API. Yes, yes.
Have you worked with middleware applications like ESB containers?
No, no.
Okay, okay, okay. How you rate yourself in Java out of 10? Will 10 be the
That's a
maximum?
tough. 6.5 because I'm still learning.
Mm-hmm.
It's a continuous learning process. And
Okay, so which version of Java you are currently comfortable with?
so yeah, so currently we're using Java 8, Java 8
Okay,
1.8.
okay. So, like, can you explain me like what are all the new additional features that has been implemented as have you implemented as part of Java 8? So
Okay,
you
so
might have worked
yeah,
with different tools
yeah,
and
yeah.
APIs, right? Yeah.
So the most important thing that we actually implement in Java Vertex is actually basically built on Lambda operators because it is event-driven programming. So it will have some functions. We know that Java now after 1.8, Java is now having both object-oriented programming and functional programming. So that's the main aspect why we moved from Java 1.7 to Java 1.8 because of this functional programming aspect. Now we have many features, and the main feature was that the Lambda operators, the functional interfaces, the streaming, it's the stream API because we handle huge data. We need lists and maps and everything, and for this list we have to have, perform the streaming operations because it provides you number of APIs which can be used for both configuration and also for the processing purposes. And why we moved to Java 1.8 and why we are using Java 1.8 is the basic reason was that it helped us to write these functional codes. It reduced the boilerplate code and uh, excess readability, and it reduced the complex structure. So it made coding much more simple, I can say.
So how will you make your say, for example, if you're writing a piece of code in your Java, so how will you make yourself flexible, like by doing a piece of code that this could be scalable or this could be performance uh, best code? So how will you monitor that? So for example, you might have used a variable which is not used. You might have used loops which is never needed. So how will you monitor? How will you make sure your code is optimal? So what are all the steps you have taken, or what are the steps you would like to take to make sure the code is optimal?
Okay, so see,
You might have
actually in
used a
our
different
project,
data structures, right? Like for example, you might have used array list. So in that case, you
yeah.
might need to go with hash map. So there are a couple of scenarios, right? So in that cases, like how will you identify to make sure that whatever the code you are writing is optimal or the
Yeah,
performance
yeah,
best? Yeah.
okay. So we have certain standards in our project. So if I start from the very basic is that whenever we code, if we're using loops, we will not be doing three inner loops. The maximum will be two, so that the coding remains simple. Now, if I come to the method structure, each of the method that we write in our project should not exceed 50 lines. So we are just increasing the modularity. And now if I come to the class structure should not exceed 350 lines. So this comes to the structural part. Now if I come to the functional part, so many of the times the most, even we if we want to store some elements, say homogeneous elements, so what we use is list, but sometimes list is not, what to say, is not optimized or not optimum, because you know that in list, within list, the main structure is arrays. So if I exclude or include something, so it will perform the positional changing for each and every object. So sometimes, the most of the times what we do is that we replace list with linked lists, because we can use that linked list container structure for that, and it also is helpful for the iteration purposes. Yeah, for one thing that we use list is that if we want to retrieve, for example, for most of the gate API that we write, we need to access the elements from certain positions, certain IDs. In that cases, we actually use array list because it helps our retrieval performance, because in array list you can retrieve the elements with the index. Now when it comes to maps and hash maps, so sometimes it depends on what we need. We need a synchronized one or a not non-synchronized one. So sometimes instead of hash we use synchronized hash maps. And we also have used weak hash maps, because we know that weak hash maps, if we are storing that key value, the key value pair we have in hash map. So if the key is storing a null value, that weak hash map will allow you or allow the garbage collection internally to collect those, which hash maps doesn't allow. So many of the times when you think that yeah, sometimes some of the key values can be null. So in that case, we are using weak maps. So these are some of the implementations that we have done. And apart from that, we are trying to reduce the null checks, because most of the times what happens is that in GET APIs or POST APIs, sometimes the return object may be null. So in that case, we use the Java 8 feature for like optional. So we know that optional can be used to check whether the object is present or not. And if it is not present, means it does not store null object, but it can hold that null reference. So we also implement optional for that. And from the code structure, I can say that functional interface is very much important, because we can give the implementation of this functional interface using the Lambda operation. So in the runtime, we are giving the implementation. We are not extending it, or we are not writing extra code. We can use that functional Lambda operator syntax for giving the parameters and the return types at the runtime, or in a less boilerplate code, something like that.
So what is the use of concurrent hash map?
Okay, so concurrent hash map. So what happened is that in concurrent hash map, so if I go into the what I know actually, in the internal structure of any map, the map contains containers. Okay, so each container actually stores linked lists. It have a series of linked lists. So what happens in case of normal map or synchronized map? So whenever a particular thread is accessing any particular container, all the other containers will be locked. It will not allow any other containers to read or write anything. That is a synchronized map. Now we know that normal hash map is not synchronized, it's not thread safe, so we have other issues with that. But in case of concurrent hash maps, what happens is that if a particular thread is reading a particular, say, container 1, it is reading or writing something into it, it will only lock that particular container, and all the remaining containers will not be locked. They will be still available for reading.
Can you tell me one real example where you could use the concurrent hash map? Maybe one real-time example.
Okay, I haven't used in my real life, so I'm thinking of a scenario where we can use.
And this might be like you might have used. I can give you one clue. Like we might have used in multi-threaded application, right?
Yeah, I get it. So yeah, in multi-threaded application we can use it, because for example, in our project where we using Vertex, so as it is event driven, so sometimes what happens is that we have multiple threads which are accessing a particular map that are storing the product and prices. So each product is particularly mapped to a particular price on the base of a region. So in that case, what happens is that if I have a particular product and it is present in 2 regions, say it is in UK and it is also in Australia, so it will have 2 prices. Now, if in case of a concurrent hash map, I can just simply, when I'm updating the price of the US one, I will not allow the other thread to modify that particular US price. It can read the price of other regions, but it will not be able to modify the value of the US price, because the lock is already acquired for that particular container, something like that. I'm not that much sure, because I haven't used concurrent hash maps that much in our project, but I'm just guessing we can do it like that for product and prices, something like that.
Okay. So like you have talked about Java Vertex, right? So can you tell me say like what are the advantage of using Java Vertex? So what is the need for that?
Okay, so what happens is if I just in an abstract way, I say that Vertex is actually composed of different verticals. So we have different verticals which are deployed. So one vertical will be responsible for my DAO classes, one vertical will be responsible for my service classes, and one vertical is responsible for my router classes. Now in Vertex, what is happening is that it is event driven, so it is not waiting for someone to give the result. What happens in Spring Boot or Spring is that it is synchronous. It will always be dependent on the other methods or the other functions to return it something, and then it will perform the other function. If that particular method is not returning something, it will wait for it. It will not execute the other functions. So if I draw an analogy here, so suppose I have a task. Okay, so my task is to cook food, and I have me and my friend. So me and my friend are the two threads that are working. So my task is not dependent on what my friend is doing. So if I'm doing something, if I'm making tea, at the same time he can go and make some toasts or omelets. So it is not dependent on my task that I will finish making tea and then he will start that particular task of making a toast or making an omelet. And that we hand in Vertex we handle with that with future. We have a object called future. It's an event handler. So whenever that particular event is handled, future will send the calling method. Yeah, this method has been handled right now. Now you can go on and execute the rest of the business logics. So suppose, for example, I'm giving an example. I have a particular say product, and that product has to be inserted into the DynamoDB, but only when the product is particularly mapped to a certain color, certain price. So for color, I have a service. For a price, I have a service. Now the color method is calling another API to get the color of a particular product from DB. And the price is also handled by another method, which is calling the DB to get the prices. Now, when I receive the price, I will call both these methods. Now, suppose the color method have already called the color DB and it retrieved the color, and future will say, yeah, I have got the color. So now you can take the color, but my price, we haven't received the price yet. So what will happen? It will not wait for the price. For the time being, it will perform the other logics, which is related to the color portion. Say after the color, we want what are the color, different types of color available for this particular product. So it will apply those business logic. It will not wait for the price. Now, when the price is handled, future will send the method. Yeah, I have got the price now. Now you can also execute the price logics. And now in this way, I have configured both prices and colors, but making optimum means I'm using the code to this optimum. I'm using multiple threads and I'm using it in series of events. I'm not waiting for a particular event to occur first and then I'm not moving to this next event, but in a concurrent way I'm using it. So something like that.
So like, is it possible to run a batch job using the Java Vertex?
Yes, in case of insertion means when we ingest the data in the DB, we sometimes use batch items. So what happens is that in batch items, so we have a default value say 100 or 200. So in batches of 200, it will just load all the data, save all the data into the DB, something like that. We can configure that. We have deployment options. We have the DynamoDB table options where we can configure that. And it also allows you some. So what happens is that when we perform the batch operation, one problem that we have is DynamoDB throttle. So simultaneously, when you are inserting number of projects, the number of products, the DynamoDB couldn't handle it. So it will have a throttling. So in case of throttling, it will throw an error. It will give a log that DynamoDB throttling is occurring, so we cannot insert these records. So what DynamoDB offers is retry operation. So we can configure the retry operation. So by default, I think retry operation is 3, but we can configure it to 10 or 11. So once it cannot insert the particular data or batch of data into the DB, so it will again try. So it will try up to the number that we have specified. So if I specify 10 times, so it will go on for 10 times. If it is not inserted, if it is inserted, then it will not take that particular number into consideration.
Okay, so if you're running a batch job, so for example, your batch job calls an endpoint. Endpoint is a different third-party web service. Consider it is a REST API or a SOAP API, kind of a third-party endpoint. So if you're consuming that endpoint, so if there is during your batch run, so there might be getting some timeout errors during those batch of execution. So in that case, like how will you retry those records, or how will you reprocess those records? So in case, so for suppose if you have thousands of records and 500 of them were processed and 500 were failed due to the connectivity issue or any other timing issue or any issue with respect to the third-party endpoint. So in that case, like how you handle the error or failed mechanism, like how will you retry the failed records which has been failed status?
So there are two ways. The first one is that it cannot be handled. What we do is that we again do the entire operation again. So what will happen that DynamoDB allows you upsert operation. So those 500 records will be inserted for the first time, and what was already inserted, they will be upserted, means updated and then inserted. And the second case is that we are using actually web client. Okay, so Vertex offers you a web client. So web client is something like you can call the other service with a particular URI, Uniform Resource Indicator, and you give the headers and all those things. And if something happens, as you said, that if there is a timeout, so internally it calls an event bus. So event bus is something like that, you can say it's a mode of communication. So it goes on what to say, putting the data in a form of a queue in the event bus. Okay. So what will happen is that if I am getting a connectivity error for a particular operation, so the objects which are already in the queue, those will be inserted. But if some of the objects which are not in the queue and we got a connectivity error, so those objects or those products will be lost. So what we have to do, we have to again run the entire operation again. So this is a drawback we are having, and we're trying to handle this. So there are certain things, actually the project is already in say it's not completed, there are many stories in the backlog, so we also have to implement the security also. We haven't implemented the security. So in that case, currently we are just using a particular header as a mode of security for calling one service to another. So you have to also implement the security. So there are some drawbacks in having such a certain applications as these applications. So one scenario that you said just now, that what happens in a connectivity issue. So the data is lost. When I go to the AWS console, I see that there is a connectivity issue. So I go to Kibana or Grafana, and I can see that this amount of products has not been inserted. So I have to run the entire application again. So there are certain drawbacks, but what it gives you is that in case of any real-time application, you can use Vertex because of this event handling mechanism, which was not provided by Spring Boot. So that's why we started with Spring Boot and then we moved to Vertex.
Okay. Oh, you have worked with REST and SOAP web services, right? So
Not SOAP,
So
but
how-
I've used REST. Yeah.
REST, not SOAP. Okay. So what are all the things you needed to create a new REST API? So how will you write? I just want to create, and you consider you are a producer of the web service. So you just want to write your own web service to consume at other end. So what are all the things needed? So how will you secure your web service?
Okay. So if I can do it in two ways, means in Vertex also, and in case of Spring Boot also. So if I start with Vertex, so what we do is, for in case of any RESTful API, we have certain endpoints, say get endpoints or post endpoints. So post is for saving something, and get is for getting retrieving certain attributes. So first, what we'll do is we'll define all these endpoints in the YML file. We'll give certain validations. We'll give the mapping, means what URI I have to call. I have to mention whether it is in case of a get operation or in case of a post operation. We put in case of post operation, we put everything in the JSON body or the request body. But in case of request get API, what we do is that we either use path variable or we use request parameters. So in case of path variables, I have to define the everything in the URL structure. But in case of request parameters, is not in the URL structure, we can use it as optional, and we can define that these are the request parameters. We generally configure it with a question mark or the with that sign. So I have defined my endpoints. Now I have to map those to my particular methods. So I will have my router vertical, as I said. So the router vertical's purpose, it just like it provides a routing context. So it actually internally extends the HTTP request servlet. So the routing context is responsible for mapping these endpoints to particular method. So what I'll do is that I will first retrieve the parameters that I have already defined in my endpoint. So suppose I'm trying to get a particular product with a particular ID. So my request parameter is ID. So I will do that routing context dot get ID get param, and within that I will mention the string name or the particular request parameter name, and I will retrieve the ID. Now once I retrieve the ID, I will pass it to my service layer first. The service layer will do some operations or checks, provide some anti-corruption or validation things, whether the ID is valid or not, whether I have supplied some invalid IDs. And after that, the call will move to the DAO class. In the DAO class, I am using DynamoDB, so I will just do load async, or asynchronously loading the item, or I will just simply write the DynamoDB name and I will write load and I will give the ID. So the entire document will be loaded. And once I once I get that entire document, I can map it to a DTO. Okay, so I will already define a DTO because I cannot expose the entire DB model. I need a DTO for that. So I'll map it. I will do it either by using a JSON decoder, map this, or I can also use model mappers for mapping the model to a DTO. So once I receive the DTO, I will send it back to the vertical. In the vertical, I have routing context. Routing context provide you a HTTP response. Routing context response, I will just encode it prettily and I will just expose it. I can expose it in the Postman, or I can again provide a wrapper for it, and I can provide it to the JSP classes, and the UI guys will then use those values and map those and show it to the front end users, something like that. And in case of a Spring Boot, it is almost similar, same things, but in what happens is that they don't have these routing context, so we have the annotations, so request mapping or say get mapping, post mapping. So request mapping is as a whole. When you say request mapping, it can be both post and it can be get. So you have to exclusively mention which method you are using. So better I use the get mapping because it will say that I'm using the get method or getter method or the get endpoint. I have to mention the URL, and in case of post mapping, I have to mention the response request body. I will mention the path variables, or in case of request parameters, I will give the request parameters. I can use it for the same purpose that I have done for the router vertical, that is calling a service, then I'm calling a DAO, and then I'm retrieving the entity, mapping it to a DTO, and then providing it to the front end. And in case of security, that we haven't applied, but what we are planning right now is that in Vertex we don't we cannot apply the Spring Boot security. Also, when we used to have Spring Boot, you applied some of the JWT concepts. So what happened is that we had a user model, user management class, and this user management class will have that authorization and authentication manager builder. So I can use that. I can use the web app web security configure adapter to override the configure method, and I can provide my own custom roles and my custom authentication and authorization logics. And using that, I can authorize my calls. But most of the time, what happens is that our APIs are called internally by the other squad. It is not exposed to the end users or other third-party users. So for the time being, we are just using some hard-coded values for that, so that the hard-coded values are just validated in the header. And if that calling API or posting API is having those values, we just allow them to access our my responses.
So how will you store the, like, how will you validate using the security credentials? So it's a kind of a username password for the each and every endpoint. That's what you're saying?
No, we are using some tokens, so hard-coded tokens for that. We are providing the tokens in the header, and it's coming from there.
It's a kind of a
But
OAuth application. Are you have heard of
JWT token? JWT tokens.
Okay.
Yeah, it is still under implementation. We haven't done the entire thing. We need to do that now.
Okay. Okay. So how long the token will be valid? So what is the validity of the token?
We haven't given a timeline for that. For the time being, I think it's just checking whether it has a header. The header has a particular token or not. If it is having, then it is passing or allowing the other services to retrieve it. So there is a lot of POCs to be done for that.
Okay. Okay. That's fine. So you have worked with PostgreSDB?
Not that much, but it is relational DB. We use it sometimes for the. I said I have worked in some Apache Airflow function. So what happens is that the client sometimes stores some of the records in the PostgreDB. So we have to retrieve those data from the PostgreDB, and then we have to validate and then insert into the DynamoDB. So for some of the applications and services I have used, it's kind of a relational DB with the same syntaxes like SQL DBs. Like.
Okay, so for example, I have a table with duplicate records. It's kind of a single standalone table. So how will you find out the number of duplicate records in a table?
Actually, I don't know. I haven't used PostgreDB that much.
Okay, it's kind of not related to Postgres. Like it's kind of a general. It is common for SQL as well. So generic query.
Okay, so you're asking that in case of duplicate values.
Yes. I want to say, like, you have employee ID in the table. There might be a duplicate ID in the table of employee. So just want to find out the duplicate records.
So is employee ID a primary key? Because primary key cannot be having duplicate values, right?
Yeah, I'm just saying an example as employee ID. There might be another column, which can allow duplicates.
Sorry, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, no problem. Okay. So you worked with the AWS. Have you ever worked in deployment of the application, or like just a kind of using a console, or like how familiar are with AWS?
Okay, so yeah, so For the as you said, for the deployment, we have a separate team, say platform team. Actually, they are managed by the client only. So they are doing the CI/CD deployments. They are mentioning everything in the YML files, and we are having those microservice concepts like continuous integration, continuous development, and continuous deployment. And in case of how much familiar I am is that I have used, in case of AWS, I've used my DynamoDB, I have used S3 buckets, and I have also some idea about Kinesis shards and all that. It's just a streaming service like any other streaming services. And EC2 instances. So EC2 instances are nothing but like virtual machines where you can deploy your code. So as we have the microservice architecture, so we are deploying the Docker for our local or development purposes, and for the deployment purposes, we are using the EC2 instances, the build team or the platform team.
So you worked with microservices, right? So are
Yeah.
you so like what is the difference between a normal application service and a microservice?
Okay, so the basic concept around microservice is that you are actually breaking down that monolithic structure into small services, and these small services can be managed by separate teams. So in a way, you are increasing the modularity, you are decreasing the coupling. So each service is somewhat we cannot say they're fully independent, because we also use in microservice we have the idea of calling one service from the another service. So but to some extent we are making it independent of each other, so that each services can be deployed separately, they can be maintained separately, and if there is any issues with a particular service, those will not have implications on the other services. uh, Apart from that, it is language agnostic. We can, as I said, that I have developed some services, REST services in Java, Vertex, and Spring Boot. I have Apache Airflow, which is, you can say, which are small services only that are actually written in Python, and both of these are working in unison. So we can say, you can see that it is not dependent on a particular single language. So separate teams with separate technical expertise can work on separate services. And in case of deployment also, so what happens is that in case of what I have faced in my project is that, so for the first time when you deploy all the projects or all the microservices together, at that time the deployment time is much more than case of a monolithic architecture. But what happens is that once you deploy all the services, after that the rolling deployment, or some we are deploying in case of some releases, that time the deployment will be much faster. But that is not the case in case of when you used to have hybrids or the monolithic structure. So even for a single line of change, I have to deploy and test the entire code base. I have to do regression testing for that. The testers have to do regression testing for that. They have to test the entire build, entire other, whether it is impacting the other functionalities or not. So in case of a rolling deployment, it's a headache. But in case of microservices, the subsequent deployments or subsequent changes or maintenance will be much faster.
So how will you deploy that? Like how to deploy your microservices to your containers? So like what are all the containers you are using it? So how will you deploy that to the container?
Okay, so yeah, so as I said that we actually don't deploy, so we actually push our code into the repository. So the platform team will take the jars from there. We actually do jar file, so they will actually use the jars, and they will provide a CI/CD pipeline. So they will give some, as far as I know, they give some configurations in the YML file, and the CI/CD pipeline is built from that YML file. So first, it will check the development build. With it. If it is passed, then it will move on to the Sonar build. If it is passed, then it will move on to the automation build. And now, if the automation build is green, then the code will be automatically deployed to the next higher environment. So you have 3 environments, like development and QA and the production. So all these steps will be performed in each of the environments. So once everything is passed in QA, it will automatically deploy to the production. So and those access actually resides in the platform team users. And for our local testing, most of the time we use our own system, because in case of AWS, you need nothing. You just need a AWS CLI. You have to give the access key and secret key, and you can access all the AWS features in your local system. So you can check your own code in local system in Eclipse also, or you can also do a Java jar, Java-jar, and you can see in the CMD whether it is running or not. You can use Postman for checking the REST APIs are calling or getting the methods or getting the entities from the DB or not, because my AWS is connected to my local system using the AWS CLI. And for an integrated way of testing, the testers, what they do is that they deploy we have a sandbox kind of thing. It's a EC2 instance provided to us by our client. We deploy the code over there, and in that case, the tester will test all the services in an unison to see that whether all the services are working fine, or whether they're communicating with each other okay or not.
Okay. So if you're using a web service, so there might be a chance like you might integrate your web service with different applications, right? So in that case, like in order to make sure that your web service works or supports different data formats, so like for example, some kind of third party application might require the response of your web service in XML format. Some application might require your response in JSON format. Some application might require in different format. So how will you make sure your endpoint works in different formats?
Okay, so for the time being, we are using only JSON. We actually give our type as
Okay.
application JSON because the other
Okay.
services are which are using means our consumer. We actually what happens is that the entire project is divided into small groups. So what happens is our consumer is basically the checkout squad and the cart squad. So whatever the services that we are building actually consumed by them, and then they are using those data to expose to the outside world or some other things. Whether user is what to say means booking a product or buying a product. So it is their duty to show that a particular data in what format they want. So our consumers are basically internal consumers, the other services that are used by the other squads. So actually we give the type always as application JSON.
Okay, so do you know like how to convert a JSON to XML?
Internally using a code inside using Java, something
Yeah,
like that you are saying.
any API, yes.
Actually, when we did in Spring Boot, I think we have an annotation for that, which will actually specify that which type of language I'm using, whether it is application. I don't remember the actual annotation, but yeah, it can be done using the annotation. In case for request mapping or post mapping, we actually mentioned some annotations that whether it is going to be in JSON format or text format or XML format. I'm not remembering the exact annotation right now. It was actually provided along with that request mapping or post mapping annotation.
Okay. Okay. So one more question. So regarding the Java. So consider you're running a thread application. Okay. So where consider a thread where which we are writing a code to print out the numbers. Say for example 1 to 10. You have one more thread you have written to print out the alphabet, say like A to Z, right? So I'm running the two threads parallelly, right? Understand this question. So I want to make sure my output is like first print A and then number one, print B number two, print C number three, print D number four. So how will you make sure that the both threads running at the same time produce this result?
Okay, so it's kind of a context switching, right? Uh, so we can use a thread.sleep and give a particular time so that after every 5 seconds and means we can configure that. For example, you said that one will print the integers and one will print the number. So if I say that uh, the integers will be printed first and then the alphabet. So if I give it in an arithmetic way, say for the numbers it will sleep for 5 seconds. So it will wait for 5 seconds. And if that I give for the alphabet, say 2 seconds, let us sleep. So first my so first my alphabet, my integer will go, then it will sleep for 5 seconds. Within that, I can print my. I'm not sure because I haven't used it practically, but I think we can do that with the sleep mechanism. But I don't know the exact logic for that. Sorry, but I don't know the exact logic. I haven't
Okay,
implemented this kind of code.
okay, it's fine. So have you used any tools like to for code quality check? Like, have you ever used any tools in your application?
No, no, no.
Okay. So how like what are the deployment tools you're using it? So for CD and
Jenkins,
CI. Okay.
Jenkins.
Okay. So like how will you measure your database performance? So like what are all the steps to take to monitor the DB performance? Like how will you just kind of the DB statistics? So like sometimes my database may get huge sets of records during a batch job runs, right? So in that case, my application may go a little bit slow down, right? So in that case, like you need to manage the scalability of your application. So in case if there is a kind of a batch job running during the backend, so how will you manage the scalability of the application, or like how what are the data was tools you are using to monitor it? And how will you reduce that? So how will you uh, fix that?
Okay, so as far as I know, because first of all, for the monitoring purposes, AWS DynamoDB already provides the metrics tab. Okay, so if you go to DynamoDB, you select a particular DB, will have a metrics tab, and it will show how many data are inserted per how many units are inserted per second, or how many units are extracted in case of a get per second. What is the load? What is the throttling throttling percentage? Everything will be shown. So from that you can monitor. And in case of scaling that you said that whether it is be horizontal scaling or vertical scaling, the DynamoDB actually maintains that internally. Okay, so we don't have to configure it by ourselves. It actually maintains the scaling portion, and the time it does not able to scale itself, it will throw the throttling error. So we don't have to manage that exclusively, and that was the actual reason for using DynamoDB instead of MongoDB. We haven't used, and so that's the main reason that we use DynamoDB, because of its auto scaling performances and auto scaling features. But yeah, there is a, as it is not under our control, or as we cannot configure it, so we also cannot handle the throttling error, and that's the reason we use the retry operation for configuring it. How many times it will be retried if it is getting a throttling error? How many times we will try to again insert the same data? So, and for the monitoring purposes, we actually use those to see how the DB is performing. If we see there is some discrepancies, then we have to again say, okay, then the batching size must be decreased, or we have to use some other batching size, as we cannot go with this batching size because the DB performance is quite low. Something like that we do.
Okay.